Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath, founder of Thrive Meetings and Events and the podcast. I am sitting in the Marriott Marquis, New York City lobby. You will see an elevator going up and down behind my head at some point, probably during this whole podcast, but I'm excited to be broadcasting live from this hotel lobby. And especially talking to the two women that I'm talking to today from Meeting Professionals International. In the middle there is Tanya Philyaw. I did that right. Thank you for the pronunciation, Tanya Philyaw, who is the senior meeting planner at MPI, which is Meeting Professionals International. And then to her left and on the far right is Annette, Gregg, who is the Chief Revenue Officer for MPI. And for all of those who don't know it, MPI is the world's largest association for meeting and event professionals. And Annette has extensive background in the meeting and event hospitality industry, serving executive level positions in corporations, associations, and nonprofits. So brings to her role a lot of different angles and perspectives. So thank you both for being here.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yes.
You're welcome. And so the topic of today's discussion is your MPI's World Education Congress and how you manage food and beverage at that event. And it happened, was it 2 weeks now? 3 weeks ago?
Yeah, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
we're all just coming. We're all just getting a full night's sleep again. So we're a little off on our timelines.
It's been a blur.
Exactly. So, managing an event that hosts meeting and event planners we all make fun of it. It's got to be hard to do.
Yeah.
And especially food and beverage. Either one of you want to talk about that?
Well, I'll start. We do talk about cooking for chefs. And that's literally and figuratively. So as you produce the industry's largest conference for meeting and event professionals, all eyes are going to be on you. So our conference is anywhere. This year it was about 2,000 people. Pre-COVID, we're about 3,500 on site. So there's a lot of eyes on everything we do. And then food is just one of those things that people remember. So you don't want them to remember it for the wrong reasons. You don't want them leaving the conference talking about poor food choices that we made as the event designers. You want them almost not thinking about it or talking well about it. And Tanya for years has especially led the menu selection and all the food beverage choices that go with our it's called WEC, World Education Congress.
Absolutely. And, it's taking chances. It's, it's putting things out there that and it's hard now to do things you might not have seen. That's not really what it is. It's just taking chances of different ways of service and, and making sure, again, everyone's accommodated and everybody leaves with a full stomach.
Yeah. And that's really important because you don't want anybody to go hungry or hangry. You don't want anybody to be hangry.
Right.
So how many food and beverage functions do you have at the event? And Tanya, just off the top of your head,
we have what I call the strong six, which are on site, and those are breaks and lunch. We are not we generally do not serve breakfast, but we have we typically have 3 lunches, but this year we cut it short to 2 lunches. And then we have either 4 to 6 AM PM breaks that to me are important to make sure that since you're not having breakfast and it may be later to lunch or earlier to lunch and you may need to have something in the afternoon to sustain, those are what I call the top 6.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And
awesome.
I think the other kind of interesting part of it is when we bring WEC to a city, the host city also produces the opening and closing night party. So we have line of sight to those events, but Tanya doesn't necessarily choose those menus, but she absolutely wants to make sure that they're kind of up to standard and they are serving all of our needs. So it's kind of almost that dotted line supervision of those events also at night. And those are big parties and those can be out on a baseball field. It's across the gamut as far as the type of settings we're in, which means you don't never know what kind of food you're going to get sometimes.
Exactly.
Right. And even the accessibility to some of those events too. There's been events that I've been to that like that are on a beach or whatever, and that sponsor chose that. But it is kind of hard, and I communicated to planners as well, as like, yes, you do have a contract with that sponsor, so push them or encourage them to do as much as they possibly can to meet the attendees' needs. Because I also think the sponsor doesn't want to put a bad mouth, bad face on as well.
Yeah. One thing that came up this year, so the middle night, we have 3 nights that we feed people, and the night in the middle is what's called our gala or our president's dinner, also a sponsored event. So we do have a hand in menu selection, but really, so our signature sponsor is a certain hotel chain, and they always want to showcase, a certain theme that they're doing. For this year, they really wanted to marry it with the passions around of the honoree, and the honoree was very into sustainability. So we had a plant-based menu, and with a very tight carbon footprint. Everything was sourced relatively locally. So there was a really big story behind this menu. And I think one of the things we learned is, it made a whole lot of sense to the 10 of us that were in the know leading up into this. But when your attendees sitting there looking at a lasagna made of plants, they don't know the story behind the story. So you really have to communicate. If you're making riskier choices like that, and they've paid a couple $100 to have a seat at this gala, they're just kind of going to expect that traditional ROI, big hearty meal. And that's just kind of one of the learnings we had this year. But it goes back to the kind of all the stakeholders involved. It was delicious, but some of people walked away feeling like, gosh, what was that it? And, there was an intentionality behind it that we probably didn't communicate well enough.
Yeah. And I've seen that happen in other events too. And I think we've just got to start being better about it. Right. And across the board. And it's not pointing fingers at anybody, but it's our learning curve as planners too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot of things, one of the main things that I found, that's new that I've learned, happens to be with coming out of the pandemic. We learned last year in Vegas that we needed to really cut back on complex service and complex meals. We wanted it, and everybody wanted it in 2019 leading up to, you want difference and you want variety, but when you've got servers that have been not serving large events for the last year and a half, and it's funny because Vegas came back before San Francisco came back, kind of thing. So one of the hard things I was very stickler about, especially on site at Moscone, is it can't be complex. It must be something that is a 2-service item, even if they're picking up, even if attendees have to pick up their dessert leaving, kind of thing. Yeah. So just complexity, is a tendency for disaster right now. Doesn't mean it always will be, but right now, complex is too much.
That's a really good point. And I was at that event in Vegas, and I remember, we had great buffets, and it varied from box lunch buffets to service buffets. But that last meal, right, it was that seated meal sponsored by San Francisco. And my friend Angie said she just stopped one server because he was so flustered. Yeah. And she's like, just stop and breathe. And he's like, but I got to get all these meals out. She's like, we know where you're coming from. So just take it easy and take your time feeding us. Right. And we have to give them the grace too.
Absolutely. Tanya, that is such a good example because, the way we have it set up is that the next year's host is the host of that previous year's lunch. So San Francisco really wanted to highlight this celebrity chef's intricate menu. And it's a COVID thing. Like Tanya said, is like, okay, then you got to sit down and go, okay, this is your menu that you want. How is this going to play out when it was a brand new building that had just reopened after COVID? So Tanya's not kidding. Some of the wait staff, we knew the meeting space better than some of the wait staff because we had already been in the building for several days and knew the back of the house. And some of these waiters were just showing up that day, and then they have to prepare a 5-step dessert, these
Yeah.
pork. It was really the first time I had even thought about it that way. But it was a big
Yeah.
learning for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So Carolyn Browning's listening to us, and she was at WEC this year, and she's like, the opening and closing receptions had great options, easy to walk and eat and eat. So thanks, Carolyn.
Good.
Great.
Good.
So Tanya, tell everybody at WEC, your attendee base, how many attendees actually have dietary restrictions that you're managing?
We typical WEC is 30%. So whether that is allergy related, dietary needs or restriction related, whatever the case may be, lots of gluten-free, and there's a lot more gluten-free now than there have been in the past. I know that you're probably seeing this, Tracy, everywhere, but gluten-free is and dairy-free, both of them. So when you go into gluten-free, dairy-free, then you're cutting out, a lot of options that even were something that they could have before. But we have, vegetarians, vegans, pescatarians, a lot that don't eat red meat. So we go ahead and start our menus based on all of those items, because I know that they're coming. And I pull dietary, pull the dietary restrictions probably about once a month leading up to final guarantees, just to see if there's anything that's special. And when I say special, I mean something we need to pay extra attention to, like we designed salads for the first day this year, and I pulled the last pulling that I had a gentleman on there that's allergic to lettuce. And so we reached out to him, and I was like, okay, we've planned salads. Is there anything on this menu, providing him the menu, that that you can eat, or do I need to make special accommodations?
And what did he say?
He actually was able to eat. He said that it was only iceberg and romaine that bothered him, and we had some kale based salads and some. I think the Thai salad was one that he said he could use or eat.
All right. Well, that's good, and I think it's important picking up that telephone and call and having that conversation helps a lot too.
Absolutely, and he said that no one had ever reached out to him before in regards to having a lettuce allergy. And I thought, well, that's sort of surprising, because most of your 3-course meals will have some sort of salad to begin with. So
exactly. Yeah, pretty much. And it's preset, right?
Exactly.
So I know one of your meals, was that the IMEX sponsored lunch?
Correct. Yes.
And I know on that lunch, it was promoted. I think I saw it on the menus online. So everybody as well, just so you know, Tanya posted the menus on the website as well as on the event app, so that attendees could look at that. So it mentioned water wise. Can you tell me what that means and how that came about?
Absolutely. We partner with IMEX. They're a strategic partner, and they are very sustainability conscious, and they ask that we try to be as water-wise friendly as possible. And what water-wise friendly means is the amount of water that it takes to for a cow, just bringing it down, a cow is a lot heavier than what it takes to for a chicken or for fowl. So so they ask that we be environmentally conscious of using things that take more water, that take more feed, that take, anything that's taking up more more to build it, are things they like to steer away from. And they've while we would love to go completely vegetarian in some meals, as we did, for the president's dinner, sometimes it's too much, and you can't. So this year, all of the options came clean of proteins, and you were able to choose your own protein. So that's how that meal came about.
And how did that go over?
I think it went well. I think, we have some learning on it. Not everybody likes salads. There is a fine line of making everyone happy, accommodating everyone, and and making sure that at least most of the attendees felt like they got what they were looking for.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that was interesting about that meal was watching. I don't know how you ordered, Tanya, but it kind of came in a pretty good, hefty size container that most people, I think, would feel adequate. But you saw people taking 2 or 3 of them too, because at first glance, it just did, is this going to be enough food? So I don't know how you guarantee sometimes for some of those. Do you assume people are going to take one? You just balance it, and some people are going to take 1.5, and you do the math. I mean, I don't know how it worked out, if we ran out of food that day or not.
No, we were good. We were good. Which, and it is, and I don't mean to stereotype, but you do have more men that looked at the meal and said, again, I'm going to be hungry. So I'm going to have 2. And, and then, most female attendees, I think, the only time that I would see 2 or 3 of they were, and I asked, because I even asked in our staff office, I said, now, why did you take 2? And she said, well, there was cheese in the other one and I wanted it.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm guilty of eating if there's nobody sitting next to me, I'm guilty of eating that salad next to me as well before the meal comes out. So, so somebody just posted on here, I was very surprised that everything for the water-wise lunch was served in single-use plastic containers. Can you address that?
Absolutely. They were all either compostable or recyclable. So, and Moscone, they actually have a sorter, which I don't know. I know last year coming out of Caesars, there was a lot of question about the sustainability of single-use products. And there is a sorter for recycling and for compostability behind the scenes. So a lot of the large properties have that now. And I think, people are worried that the sole recycling is based on the sorting that they do in the 3 trash cans when they walk out the door, but that's not the case. There is someone, I'm not sure if it's a stewarding thing in the back or what department it's under, but that was one of my specific questions because there were a couple of the containers, and I can't remember exactly which one it was, that was at first compostable and they weren't able to get that product in, so they moved to a recyclable product. And I was like, as long as we're able to recycle or compost, I'm fine with using them. I prefer compostable, but I wanted to make sure that we were also able to accommodate the fact that they couldn't get something in.
Okay, and I think that person just replied to as saying all plastic is recyclable. Actually, I have to contend with that because I know that some cups are not recyclable, at least in my town. Depending on where you are, I think that's a big question of what your city can recycle, because I know some cities have also banned or they're not recycling glass anymore. So it is, I think it's a question of where your meeting is on what can be recycled. So,
and it kind of, Tracy, goes back to my comment earlier about just telling the story better. We don't want anybody to walk away thinking we're being environmentally irresponsible. And I know it's one of Tanya's first things she asked when you have these, because everyone's individual choice now, and especially with COVID, you saw a lot more of these single serving options, which did seem to generate more plastic and single use plastic. So Tanya was very, very intentional about that. Like, hey, we don't want to create more havoc to the environment with these food choices. So San Francisco, very progressive in this, Moscone, very progressive. And we have to tell that story, make sure planners are putting that in their show dailies. Like, hey, we're taking good care of the environment, enjoy your lunch today, sort of thing.
Yeah. And I like doing that. I like the idea of putting it in the show daily as well, because it brings more attention to it. And I think we just have to think differently how we're communicating that up front and throughout. So, and even after the fact, because I did an event in April and I was able to say, we did a story in our daily, about the donations after the fact. So we were making sure that the property was doing the donations, and we donated, I want to say 250 pounds of food to a local charity. And I think that's huge and it's important to share.
Love it. And that reminded me actually of something we did on our gala night. And this was the honorees choice. So I don't want to say we came up with this great idea, but he said, look, how many people really eat the dessert? You know, you get a nice piece of cake afterwards. Half of them are left on the table. He goes, let's ask if the hotel will save the money from dessert and put out just a small cookie for everybody instead. But we will donate the value of what those desserts would have cost to a local homeless charity. And
I love that.
And we were able to tell that story from the podium too. So people don't just go, hey, what's this? I got one macaroon for dessert, but who needs another dessert, honestly? And so once we told that story, they're like, okay, you know, it directly affects 2 blocks away and, you know, that local neighborhood.
And the other thing too is donation has changed since COVID. You know, you can't, and it's different in every single city. It's not a one and done. But there's some things, you know, there's some things that can't be donated any longer, or they're not back to donation status. And what that means is they, you know, it's mostly on the donation side, not the hotel or venue that we're using. They may not have the manpower, or they may not have the accessibility, or they may not have the building they had before. You know, there's a lot of things that have changed, and you know, it's just not, they're just, some people just aren't ready to take that back on. So so donating the money instead is obviously a better solution sometimes than doing, you know, the product itself.
Well, and it also saved on the cost of making the dessert and the staffing and all of that. I love that idea. And just on another kind of little tangent, the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, which has been around since 1990, is actually being reinvigorated with the 2021 Food Donation Act. And so it's in the process. It's been introduced. So to make it easier to make donations, because so many people say, oh, we're going to get sued, you know, if somebody gets sick, and that's actually their design to make sure that you don't get sued, right? So I'm trying to get some people to talk to me about it so that that our industry knows more about it, because I think it's important. So Tanya, there was a question before we started. You said, ask me what my biggest pet peeve is. So what is your biggest pet peeve when it comes to food and beverage?
Getting a menu that doesn't have the dietary breakdowns on it.
Oh my God, I love you. I hate that.
That drives me insane. And most of the time I'll just send it back without reviewing it and say, you know, if you can tell me what products that each person can eat, then I'll, you know, look at this better. But that drives me insane, because, you know, I think, you know, I will have to say this, there is more responsiveness overall for different needs than there have been in the past. I mean, people are learning it. Chefs are learning it. They're understanding it, especially in your larger venues. You know, some of the smaller venues, I won't lie, I worked with a couple smaller venues, and it had to be, I don't want to say forced, but it requested several times. But you go into larger venues and you're not there. They understand the ask. Whether they go ahead and provide it or not, they already understand the ask. So
and I think a shout out for it was Savor, right? Tanya, who you worked with, they did a wonderful job, the in-house there at Moscone, for really accommodating what Tanya was looking for and adjusting little adjustments that we asked for. I think we were really happy with that product.
Absolutely. And Annette did our tasting. I did it virtually. Worst tasting I've ever done. I didn't get to eat anything. But you know, it's funny because people think that the tasting, we would automatically go in and ask for more of this or more of that. And in the last 3 tastings that I've done, I've asked for less.
Really?
Less protein. You know, you don't have to wow me with 8 pieces of the meat. I want what I would normally eat. And I want what everybody else would normally eat. And, you know, make this smaller, make the you know, make the bread 3 different types of bread instead of 1 large piece of bread, or, you know, just anything that we can do to make it less spicy or more spicy. We did a lot of that this year. So.
And I think looking at different cuts of meat, different styles, but also we don't need 9 ounces of animal protein as well as 3 sides and, you know, all of that. I'm like,
that's right.
Can you do 3 ounces of this and 3 ounces of that, or, you know, if you're
Yeah.
doing a dual entree, you know, you don't need all of that.
It's so true. And Tanya did a great job kind of guiding me through that tasting, because it's true. It was the first time we've done a Zoom pair I just happened to be in San Francisco. So we saved a trip that way. But she would say, okay, Annette, how does that taste? You know, do you walk away? Do you feel satiated? You know, was that difficult for you to eat? Was that confusing? Those choices, like, it's just, I learned so much from Tanya during that tasting process, because usually I'll go to those things. I'm like, yeah, that was yummy. So, I mean, she really was intentional about it. And even back to your cuts of meat, not only the size, but the certain cuts of meat. I mean, if you're facing some budget challenges, your chef can make some changes that will save you considerable money. It'll still be pork, but maybe it's a different type of cut. And that was very, very interesting for me too. Some of those options.
Well, and I heard a chef even say, I think it was 2 weeks ago, like, take regular broccoli instead of doing broccolini, because broccolini is more expensive. So even your vegetables, the types of vegetables, I don't want everybody to have green beans for the rest of their life for every meeting, but how can you, you know, do those things? And I think that's a local conversation too. One thing that I was on Global Meetings Industry Day, which was April 7th of this year. Is that right?
I think so.
It's in April.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Early April. So on that, when I was listening to Tanya, you and Melanie announced that you had already picked your menus. And so I know you really good and passionate about picking them early. So I want you to talk a little bit about that, how that helped you. But I also want to know, because of the supply chain, did Savor Moscone have any issues with what was ordered well in advance?
Not as much as the food. It was the product containers that they did have. That they did have some supply chain issues. As far as the food, we made a couple changes. We typically try to start out early January, because these are things that we can go ahead and accomplish and I can get behind me, and we don't really have to go back to. So those food and beverage is one of the very first things I try to tackle. But as far as changes, I think we made a couple changes due to avocado, but it wasn't because they couldn't get it. It was that we really didn't think after the salad was built that it was going to be sustainable in the cup and look good, because we all know how avocado looks after it's been aired out for a couple of hours. So so there was some things we changed in that direction. Again, once we did the tasting, I think we changed the cut of the meat that we were using, but it was still the same. We still used the same menu, but just changed the cut of meat. And again, we did a lot of changing of the spices, but that wasn't because of not being able to get it. It was because of just the taste and making sure that, you know, we weren't overly spicy, or that it had flavor, making sure it had flavor. So
talk about like the timing of breaks and lunches and break, you know, because I recently attended an event and there was only 5 minutes between the breaks, which is not a lot. And, you know, coming out of the pandemic, people are wanting to connect. So how do you manage the timing of breaks along with food and when you have a break in the morning and then you've got lunch and then you have another break? How do you move all of that around?
Yeah, I mean, I can start just from kind of the consumer behavior side of it. So like you said, Tracy, you know, one thing that we've learned in the pandemic is people are now comfortable coming back to these live conferences. They haven't seen some of these colleagues in a couple of years. So we learned this back last year when, again, we never stopped having an annual conference. So even we changed this at a year last year in Caesars Forum in Vegas, where we intentionally just put longer breaks and longer luncheons, because not only did they want to socialize, but they're just catching up on stuff, and they're probably understaffed like we're all feeling. So they're wearing a couple hats, and they're also just a little overwhelmed. So they need a little bit more time just to kind of, get their legs underneath them. I mean, we all kind of joked as the conference team, like we're out of conference shape and we've continued our conferences, but you know how it is. You just need a little white space. And sometimes that's just taking your lunch and going to a table and you just need to chill out a little bit and eat by yourself. And so we're just trying to be respectful of giving people options to be who they are, show up authentically. We don't want to force you into necessarily a situation where you have to talk to 8 other people and it was the only downtime you would have counted on that day. So, that's just my take kind of from the neuroscience of it. But Tanya, how about you?
Well, and I can tell you, based on, I take the schedule. Once we've devolved a type of schedule, I push very hard for making sure there should always be at least 15 minutes, if not 20, for breaks, because they're not only trying to catch food, they're also, chatting, going to the restroom, trying to get to the next location. So there definitely needs to be some time there. The one thing that I try to base is, once I figure out when lunch is going to be served, how heavy that afternoon or morning break needs to be to keep people fed and not hangry until they're able to eat again. And as we all know, anyone that's attended WEC will know that you're fed a lot. You eat a lot of food, you drink, I won't say drink a lot. That's not really the right way of saying it, but there's always those options. And this year there were even more, as we had a lot of sponsors that put food and beverage on their activation on the floor. So, so again, timing to me is important. I hate that you had a 5-minute break. That just seems unreal.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely not enough time. And I mean, thankfully the meeting rooms were close together. Okay. So what, Annette, you were talking about the, people, just the psychology of people and how we move around. How do you think we can use food and beverage in our meetings and events to build community?
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Yeah, there's some really cool articles out there about connection around food and how food is a great unifier. And that's why, you've heard these terms, right? We break bread together. So I think kind of even thinking about how that food functions, you have to feed people, right? And at least for us, we're always trying to figure out ways, how can we create these, just call them team building or unifying events. And one thing that came to mind for me was a conference we did in Europe a few years ago. And it was just such a cool blend of both of those things at the opening reception. So the food activations were around the room and maybe in 4 different stations. But as you registered for the conference, you were put on a team with people you didn't necessarily know. So you kind of found your team, and then you would go to the food activations together and you would do a task or some kind of activity in order to get the food or drink. So there was one, it was really clever. This is our European community in The Hague that put this on. And so at one of the one of the stations, the 4 of you had to write a limerick, for like a 4-line limerick, and then you've got something. And then there was another cocktail station where you could sing a song for the cocktail. And it was just such a neat way to blend it all. And I know there are introverts in the world, and this is horrifying to them. They wouldn't get shut out if you didn't want to participate in this. But there you go, Tanya. But for me, it was just such a neat twist on how you blend those things. How you can build community with a clever way of getting them around to the different stations.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, Carolyn just posted this in here. There were a lot of alcohol activations at vendor booths at WEC. So I want to ask the question, because there's 30% of people don't drink alcohol, myself included. How do we blend the non-alcoholic besides the standard sodas and the alcohol, so that the people who don't drink actually have something besides water and heavy laden soda?
Absolutely. And I, again, as sponsors, I can make a lot of suggestions. Right. But my biggest thing with the activations that were at WEC is that we kept our food and beverage out the entire time. So there was always coffee. There was always water. I don't put out soft drinks. I'm not a soft. To me, it's not a. I haven't done soft drinks for quite a few years. I want to make sure that there's some water options, some different flavored waters. Make sure coffee, hot tea, those things are out there. So those things were still available the entire time that the sponsors were doing their activations as well. And I also encouraged, there was, and I can't remember exactly which sponsor it was. They did like a canned champagne in the evenings, but in the mornings or in the afternoons, and in the mornings they would do a variety of bubbly waters. So they changed it up a little bit depending on what time it was.
And Carolyn just typed in, she said, loved the water tasting.
Good, Carolyn.
So I was looking at my the questions that I also wanted to ask, but Tanya, I want to go back to the dietary needs, and I'm going to take us back to Caesars and to the one lunch that I didn't get a meal, and I'm not pointing fingers. This happens often. It's not anything, but that going back to also that the servers were new, right? And how do you get, like, two different people told me there was not a gluten-free option, and I got chewed out on LinkedIn for posting this, but how do we do that better? And I'm asking seriously, how can we work with our catering partners to do it better and make sure our servers know where to find those meals and know who's getting them, etc. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And I think too, I am I guess, first of all, yes, we do need to do a better job, but I do understand that, right now with them finding a server, and literally they're finding it the day before because someone else is canceled, that sometimes they're not going to be able to get that information to that server. So I think us as the meeting planner itself and as the attendees for other events, if I don't have a meal in front of me, if I'm not getting what I need from the server that's serving my table, I will get up and go to someone in the room that is, that I can tell is in charge, whether it's, someone with MPI on it, or if it's the captain of the room. The captain of the room should always be in there regardless. And I hate that, he wasn't, because I definitely, that's one of their big sticklers is you have to provide these different options so that every single person can eat.
Yep. And I did get up and I found a server who ran in Caesar's Forum. He ran a half a mile probably and brought it back. I mean, and I loved him. I mean, his name is Donald. I mean, and I commended him. And so I was really appreciative, but so it's working with all of those different scenarios and figuring out how do we make that happen. And I think as planners, we have to ask those questions of our partners, right? And because a lot of times we just take this stuff for granted. And even going back well before I even started doing what I was doing, I was like, oh, I'm just assuming that the hotel's going to make the vegan and the vegetarian options, right? And they're going to serve it. Well, we don't know that anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Really. Yeah.
I think that was a great idea, Tanya, and I don't remember us doing this before, but putting the menus on the app, because that's how an attendee can take a look and go, oh boy, Tuesday, I'm going to be in trouble, or what have you,
Yeah. And I think that too, it's just a matter of communication. And I know that, we have I can't remember the percentage because I don't do percentage as well on how many are repeat WC the attendees. And Annette, you may know that number better.
20% every year.
So we've got a lot of new attendees that may not know what you and I know. And sometimes just being the direction for them is is easy. And this year I was doing a breakfast meeting before it actually even began. It was for one of our pre-con events, and I think it was actually lunch. It wasn't breakfast, but I went in and they were actually talking about providing different meal options, and they went over to the buffet, and of course everything was labeled because I we may have overlabeled, because they were like, there's a lot of these labels that look the same, but at the same time, I wanted every single thing labeled. And I know that you're a big component of this, Tracy, of making sure that if it's a lot of items together, what's actually gluten-free and what's actually vegetarian, vegan, and they can't all be shoved together, because that doesn't make them, you can't put things beside each other. So, they were actually talking about that, and she said, oh, well, there's a vegetarian option. And she mentioned something about it. I said, do you have any dietary needs that aren't accommodated on this that I need to get? And she's like, oh, wait, we were just talking about this. And I said, yes. I said, sometimes it just takes someone saying a little bit more to make sure that everyone's accommodated. And, on our smaller events, that we do with TLS, or with our Thought Leader Summit, or our experience, I'll individually ask everyone if they've had plenty to eat. But obviously for WC, that's a little bit more difficult for me to do.
Right. Yeah. It's a lot of people to ask, and it is. And I think, and I was sitting in an education session the other day, and somebody was talking. The speaker was about hospitality mentality. And just thinking about the questions, he actually gave the example. It's like, what if your guests were Martians, right? And landed on this planet? What kind of questions do they need answered about maneuvering your event, or maneuvering on the earth, right? And thinking about it that way. So you're looking at it from somebody else's eyes, right?
Absolutely. And again, it's communication. We had 2 people that indicated kosher within their registration, and I reached out to them and I said, and not that I'm stating that every person that indicates kosher is strict or non-strict. It's that, let me ask the question, what, do you need me to bring in a special meal, or are there things you can eat? That's the first question. Here are the menus, go through them. Are there things you can eat? And, then I had, we had one person that was there that he said, okay, I really don't see anything on this menu. And he said, it's not because of the options, it's because of the way it's being served. And I said, well, that makes perfect sense. Let me have a special meal so that you can have it and know that it, that it had not touched any of these other products. And that's what we did. So
that's neat.
Yeah, that's really good. And I did an event in April that was over Passover, and I had an Orthodox Jewish person attending. And she had never actually traveled through Passover. So it was a learning experience for her and I. And getting that food to the hotel. So I was like, oh, yay, this is cool. And it was also during Ramadan. And I'm like, okay, who's coming? And unfortunately, I didn't have both. I wanted both, because I wanted, it's something that we need to figure out. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So my last question for both of you is, what does a safe, well, actually I have 2 questions for you. First is, what does a safe and sustainable food and beverage experience mean to you? Safe, sustainable, and inclusive. There we go. 3 words.
Well, that's a big one. I mean, I could start. I'm less of a pro at this than Tanya, but I think in broad strokes, it's that everyone feels that they can be accommodated by coming to your event, and that even if it's not at first glance, they're going to have an experience like what Tanya does, which is reach out to them and say, okay, how can we accommodate you? People pay to come to these events. We don't want to have the attitude like, hey, take it or leave it, like I do with my son, right, when he was growing up. This is not a short order cook. You get what you get and you don't throw a fit, right? I don't know if you ever said that to your kids, but that's what you say. So, we don't say that to the attendees. We want that they're taking their time, they're taking their money to come attend this, and we want to have, to respect them and their needs. We don't take these lightly. So we want them to feel respected, and that we will work with them on finding something that will suit their needs.
Absolutely. And
Awesome.
and mine's the same. I want to know that you've left hungry, and it's funny. I want to know that you've left quiet. And I know that sounds strange, but with food and beverage, to me in a meeting, what I've learned in the last couple of years is that when you hear something, it's usually the negative. It's not really the positive. And not that I love, constructive criticism. I think it's important. But if the more quiet it is, the more I know that everyone was satisfied, because they they tend to let you know if they're not, especially at our event, since we are an event with meeting planners. So,
Right.
you know, I feel like there's, but again, I don't want to take light of someone not saying something and being an introvert and not making that, because it's important. Right. It's important to tell, someone, because if not, you don't learn.
Yep.
So.
Right. And I think also educating the attendees that we want to create this safe experience for you. So you please share with us how we can make you feel that safety. Right.
Yep. Don't be embarrassed that you have special needs. Don't be afraid to ask. Like, be very, in our approach, she's an open book. Tanya's an open book. Like, it's okay. Come to me.
Yep. Okay. So my last question is, what is your favorite food and beverage to eat during the summer?
Ooh, Tanya, do you know?
Oh goodness. Well, I like all sorts of food. So, but if I'm going to a restaurant, especially a new restaurant I've never tried, I'm going to try your signature cocktail, typically with a white alcohol versus anything red. And you know, I like things I've never tried. So I'm very outgoing on trying new things. So, but you know, I've got my favorites too.
Yeah. And I'm kind of like Tanya. I'm drawn to those lighter drinks, you know, the summer spritzy types things that are lighter, but they might have a unique cucumber twist or something. And then anything grilled. I love like thinking about grilled vegetables or grilled. It just feels like it's not going to be heavy, but I love that taste.
That's fantastic. It's really cool. Last night I was at this event and they had these really cool round, like flat grills that they were just grilling burgers on and everything. It was a really interesting new concept that I saw. So I'm going to post some pictures on that because I'm like, this would be great for caterers. Well, thank you both. Yeah. Thank you both so much for spending time with us here. And I really appreciate what you do for the industry and feeding us and feeding me. And I do typically eat really well when you feed me, Annette and Tanya. So thank you.
Yes. Well, thanks, Tracy, for having us.
You're welcome. And any parting thoughts on food and beverage?
I think we've talked about a lot.
We have.
You know, right. I'm up to all suggestions. I love new things. I love new ideas. And again, if you're posting stuff, I'm watching you. So if you're posting stuff and if there's anybody that's watching this and post, you know, in the link that they've got some ideas of neat things that they've seen, we're all for creating new opportunities.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you both again. And everybody listening, thank you for listening to the Eating in a Meeting podcast. We are here live every Wednesday on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube every Wednesday. And you can also download us on all your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, stay safe and eat well.